Welcome, folks, to another special off-season edition, episode number 26 of the No Conference for Old Men podcast today, where three old guys have a special guest in former University of Houston Cougar great, Reid Gettys, joining us for a bit of Q&A. So it's another tip of the hat to old man Bill Walker, who has a connection with Reid, and was somehow able to convince him to come on our humble podcast. We've got some questions gathered up that we'll cover from back in Reid's playing days up until now, where he's become an incredibly insightful analyst, broadcaster on ESPN for Houston Cougar games. As always, Reid's been a model ambassador for the University of Houston throughout his career, and we're going to have a bit of fun, hopefully getting into some of the stories fans have not heard before. Just as a refresher for some of the younger Houston Cougar fans, Reid is a Houston Cougar through and through, former student athlete on perhaps the greatest Houston Cougars basketball team ever during the great Phi Slamma Jamma era of the early 80s, playing alongside both Akeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler as a 6'7" point guard setup man. He still holds a ton of assist records at the University of Houston, including most career assists, most assists in a season, most assists in a single game, and the highest average assists per game, both from a career perspective and in a season, at an incredible 8.4 in the 83-84 season. Reid was also drafted by the Chicago Bulls after finishing his playing days at Houston, and beyond his post-playing career as a successful lawyer, he continues to be connected to the sport of college basketball as an ESPN analyst for ESPN. Welcome to the podcast, Reid, and thanks so much for taking the time out from your busy schedule. Anything you wanted to say to our listeners to kick things off before I turned it over to Bill to begin the interview?
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised. So when y'all first reached out to me and told me the name No Conference for Old Men, I thought, why haven't I talked to these guys before now? I thought that.
We're new. We kick this off as kind of an homage to our team joining the Big 12. Right. And we thought our program just deserved a dedicated basketball podcast. And we agreed that for three old guys that are either in retirement or close to retirement, that we're going to give it a go. So thanks so much.
I certainly qualify for all those. So I appreciate it. It'll be fun to talk to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again so much for your time.
You bet.
All right. Well, I think, Reid, we've kind of got this set up from playing days and then getting into some U of H history and then the current team and the current makeup and so forth. So, and Steve's kind of composed a lot of these questions. I'll probably either butcher them or ad lib to some extent, but yeah, we'll get going here. And, the first one has to do with, obviously, you going to U of H, the recruitment, and we were just curious about, how you were recruited coming out of Memorial and, the initial interactions with Guy V and how that all played out.
Yeah, so interesting story. So my dad and mom both went to Texas Tech.
Yeah.
My dad was a 4-year All-American football player. 47 to 50, went both ways, offensive and defensive tackle. And so I grew up, to say I was a big Red Raider fan would be an unbelievable understatement. Curtains, bedspread, pillows, T-shirts, everything in my room was red and black and had a double T on it. So I grew up dreaming about playing at Texas Tech for Gerald Myers, and Gerald Myers was at Texas Tech when my dad was there playing football, and they knew each other, and so I just always assumed that that's how it would play out. I wasn't. It's interesting because we had a playoff game my senior year, and I hadn't heard much from anybody. Heard a little bit from Arkansas, a little bit from SMU. Hadn't heard from Texas Tech at all, and U of H wasn't even on the radar. They hadn't reached out to me, and the thought of a Memorial kid going over to U of H was a foreign concept to say the least. And so we had a playoff game, and we were playing in Hawthines, and we were playing Madison. And Eric Dickens was a McDonald All-American. It ended up being a teammate at U of H, but he was the superstar for Madison. And as we're warming up, I looked over the table, and Gerald Myers is sitting there mid-court, and Coach Lewis is sitting next to him. And I thought, man, this is it. This is, it's all gonna come together. And so we ended up, we lost. Eric had a really good team, and it was close. And afterwards, my coach said, hey, there's a coach out in the hall who wants to talk to you. And I thought, man, this is it. This is so awesome. I go out in the hall, and Coach Myers is standing out there, and we kind of small talk a second. And he goes, he starts off with how much he respects my dad, and this was really classy of him because a lot of coaches wouldn't have a difficult conversation with a kid, and especially a kid that was kind of a legacy to Texas Tech. But he just said, look, I don't think you can play for me. I don't think you can play at our level and the way we play, and I just wanted to tell you that because I know I've had a lot of people reach out and I know you want to come here, but I would be doing you a disservice. I just don't think you can play here. So that's devastating. Just my high school career just ended. I had no prospects on the horizon. I go back in the locker room and I'm just almost numb. And Coach Coleman, came back in and grabbed me again. He goes, "Hey, there's a coach out in the hall who wants to talk to you." And I'm thinking, well, I already talked to him. What else does he have to say? And so I walk out in the hall, and Coach Lewis is standing there. And I'm a native Houstonian. I know Coach Lewis, and I grew up going to games, and one of my fondest memories is watching U of H beat Arkansas in the triplets and Hallfines, and so it wasn't like I didn't know who Coach Lewis was. In fact, I was at the game of the century with my dad and two brothers, and so I was like, wow. I said, hey, Coach Lewis, he goes, hey, I want you to come play for me, and I'm thinking. What?
Wow.
He goes, yeah, I want you, we're going to set up a time. We're going to come to your house. We're going to offer you a scholarship, but I want you to come play for me. And I said, hey, Coach, I just talked to Gerald Myers, and Gerald Myers said I couldn't play for him. Uh-huh. And guy goes, well, I think you can play for me.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah.
And so that was it. So my recruitment came down. I had to decide between U of H and the Sigma Chi's at University of Texas. And so I had one offer. I didn't have a junior college offer. I didn't, not Sam Houston, not HBU, not Stephen F. Austin. I had one offer.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And wow. All on the same day, right? That's just crazy.
All in the same day. And so it was cool. When Coach Lewis and Coach Schwartz finally came out to the house, they came, it was, I don't know, about 3 or 4 days later. But in between when I talked to him and they came to the house, there's a huge article on the front page. I can't remember whether it was the Post at the time or Chronicle about Akeem. And so it was a picture, and I remember like it was yesterday. And we had those goals, that had kind of almost like monkey bars, all the pipes behind it, and he's standing there, and he's got his arms up like this, and he's just arms and legs everywhere. And there's this big article, about Akeem Olajuwon, and at the time he was. They say 7 feet. He was 6'10", whatever he was, but he weighed about $175. And it's interesting because or I guess it may have even been the same day. Coach Lewis and Coach Schwartz were sitting in my living room, and my mom and dad, and Coach Lewis, they small talk a little bit and talk about how we're offering you a scholarship, and I'm trying to act like I expected it. I'm thinking, man, why? And so I said, hey, they said, do you have any questions? And I said, well, I know everything about the school. I said, I do have a question, though. That Olajuwon guy, can he play?
Nice.
They looked at each other, and for a long time, they were just quiet looking at each other. Uh-huh. And then finally, Coach Lewis smiled and turned around and he goes, well, we think he's going to be pretty good.
Reed, I remember when Olajuwon first came to campus, without social media and all this, but people around campus were saying, is this guy any good? And some would say, yeah, he's really good. And others said, no, he can't play, So it was
Well,
It was
it's
interesting.
amazing because there were so many urban myths about him, and the reality is he couldn't play very long because his back couldn't hold up. I mean, he literally weighed about $185, and there were a lot of stories out there about he came from a wealthy family, a concrete company, and come on. That wasn't his background, and so he was finally eating steaks, and he had changed his diet, and it took him a while. It took his body, his frame, a while to be able to hold up to what he was trying to put it through. So I remember he actually got to U of H a semester before, and didn't play that spring semester. But I remember that whole summer and most of the first year, he was just trying to get his body under him, and he would do freakish things in practice. But it was in between his freshman year and his sophomore year that he went from scrawny, strangly, looked like a baby giraffe trying to run down the court to a full-grown man and turned into a beast. And it was really almost felt like it was like a 3-month transformation.
Wow. So, one question I've always wanted to ask you, right? Especially I'd read about U of H being your only offer, and for you to come in and then the evolution of your own game over a very short period of time where you became a 6'7" point guard, which was unheard of back in those days. And I can't believe that you played point guard in high school. So how did that evolution occur to where you became a primary ball handler and passer? And we're talking about at a time in the Southwest Conference where you're trying to bring up the ball against folks like Darrell Walker and Alvin Robertson, right? Some of the toughest guards, even compared to today's kids. And so how did that evolution occur for your game?
It's interesting. It almost out of necessity. So growing up, we were blessed at our church. There was a man who ran the Little League basketball program, and to this day, his name was Ralph Mills. Ralph Mills knew more about basketball than anybody I've ever been around. And so I'm talking about from the time I was 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 playing for Coach Mills. He used to come to U of H games, and after the game, I think I'm going to go up to him, and he's going to go, "Oh, you were so great." And I'd walk up to him. He's like, "Why are you throwing bounce passes on the wing?" I mean, what? And it's like, "Oh my God, coach." But anyway, so growing up, I had a brother just 1 year older than me who was kind of the same height, but was big, thick, and slow. And so Coach Mills, early on in my development said, "We're going to teach you how to be a point guard because your brother's going to be inside." So then I grew up playing point guard and then also played inside. And then when we got to high school, my senior year, we had a huge team. We had a 6'9" kid that ended up going to TCU. We had a 6'7" wing that went to Arkansas. And we had a 6'5" kid that went to Vanderbilt. I mean, we were loaded.
Wow.
And we were big, but our point guard sucked. I mean, he puckered and he was scared to bring the ball up the floor. So inevitably, in high school, I would bring the ball up the floor, hand it off to him, and then he'd run the set, but I'd bring it up. So it's interesting because I went to U of H as a shooter. That was my job. I was a catch and shoot guy. And so for the first, 10 games of my career, I didn't play much. By that time I was, stupid enough to be mad about that and not appreciating who I was competing, with and against. But the competitor in me, it just made me furious. And my dad had, was such a wise man. And after I can remember sitting in the Bennigan's over there off I-45 after a game, and I can't even see straight. I played like a minute 30, and I'm thinking, this is stupid. I'm miserable. So my dad's like, well, how are you playing in practice? Dad, I'm playing great. I mean, I'm playing as well as I've ever played in my life. He goes, well, how are you shooting? I said, I'm shooting great. I mean, I'm knocking down. I bet I'm shooting 65%. I said, I'm knocking down everything. And he thinks a second. He goes, maybe that's not what he wants. I looked at him and I went, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're telling me that you're shooting great and you're not playing. He goes, why don't you try something else? And I said, well, I'm a shooter. I was recruited to be a shooter. You know, he kind of laughed. He goes, well, how's that going? And I said, it's not going very well. And he goes, let me ask you a question. He goes, is there anything on the team that nobody else does? I go, yeah, nobody passes. I said, nobody passes. And he goes, I have an idea. Why don't you try to become the best passer on the team?
That's brilliant.
And it really was. It was like a light bulb went off. You know, so the next day in practice, you know, I was turning down shots and I'm passing. And, you know, later in a couple of weeks or 2 or 3 weeks, somebody got hurt. I can't remember who it was. But in practice, I'm running the second team point guard, you know, going against Rob Williams, who is maybe one of the greatest we've ever had. But I'm playing point guard. And after practice, in the dorm, my high school coach called me, Coach Coleman, and he goes, hey, Coach Lewis called me today. And I was like, why did he call you? He goes, he called me and he goes, did you know that Reid could play point guard? and I said, what'd you tell him? He goes, of course I knew it. I told him that we use you that way all the time, that you played all 5 positions for me. And so from that day forward, I was a point guard, and I realized that it didn't matter how well I shot. You know, Eric Dickens was a McDonald All-American. He couldn't get on the floor. We had guys that were, you know, it's a matter of saying, hey, I gotta find something nobody else is doing and make it to where it's really hard for Coach Lewis to take me off the floor.
Nice. Wow.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Hey, Reid, was there a transition from high school to U of H as far as style of play from Coach Coleman to Coach Lewis?
Yeah, so that's going from Bobby Knight to Guy Lewis. You know, we in high school, literally, we didn't dribble the ball more than twice. It was pass, cut, pass, screen, cut, pass. And it's funny because I really, around Coach Lewis and Coach Swearock, you know, acted like I belonged. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So a quick story. So first day of practice, you walk in and we're scrimmaging before we get started. And I mean, the guys are it's just unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. Okay. So I've never dunked a ball in high school. Forget the fact that I'm 6'6", never dunked a ball ever. And all of a sudden, you know, I'm seeing Clyde coming down on the wing and he's got the ball behind his head. Bang! The team's jumping up and he's pinning the ball, you know, above the top of the square. And I'm like, oh, this is unbelievable. So we're doing a one-on-one drill. And Eric Dickens is guarding me, and I'm bringing the ball down the floor. And you know, I'm a right hand, left hand, you know, crossover, protect the ball. And suddenly, man, I'm dribbling between my legs, and I'm dribbling behind my back, and I'm spinning, and you know, I somehow I get by him, and I don't know how I got by him, and I thought I'm gonna dunk it and show everybody I belong. And I jumped up and stuck the ball on the rim. Feet go flying out from under me. I'm laying flat on my back on the floor. You know, everybody's laughing. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And Coach Lewis calls me over here. Gettys. Yes, sir. You know, what was that? And I'm like, what do you mean, Coach? He goes, what was that? I said, that's just how I play. And he's like, that's how you play? I'm like, yeah, yes, sir. Yeah. He said, I want you to do me a favor. He said, next time you get a breakaway and while we're playing, I want you to dunk it. I want you to go in. I don't care if somebody's there. I don't care what. He said, I want you to go in and dunk it. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we're scrimmaging and you know, I see a lane open up and I start driving through the middle of the lane and Larry Mishaw, 6'9", 265, Mr. Mean, is on one side, and Akeem's kind of behind him. I'm dribbling in. I plant my foot. I jump up as high as I can, and Larry just goes like this. He doesn't even move, and I'm thinking, man, I got him. Akeem doesn't jump. He doesn't stand up on his toes. He goes like this, thwack, blam. He blocked my dunk flat-footed. and I'm sprawled out again for the second time. This is the first practice of my college career, and I'm sprawled out again. And Coach Lewis says at the end of practice, he goes, get a shower and I'll see you in my office. I'm thinking, crap, there goes my scholarship. I'm one day in, and there goes my scholarship. So I go into his office, and he's like, what was all that? And I said, Coach, and he goes, before you tell me that's how you play, that's not how you play. And I said, no, sir, it's not. And I said, he goes, well, then what was that? What were you doing? I said, well, when I got out there, that's the way everybody else was playing. And I'm just trying to fit in. And he looks at me, and it was one of the most profound lessons I've ever learned in life. He looked at me and goes, I have an idea. He said, how about you just do you? And you let me figure out how to blend it all together. He said, you just play the way you play with your skill set, and trust me that I can figure out how to put that with Clyde and Akeem and everybody else. He goes, you think you can do that? I was like, yeah, I can do that. He goes, okay, let's try that tomorrow.
Nice.
So that was my adjustment.
Nice. So I know before we started the podcast, we had chatted a little bit around your playing days after U of H, and believe you were drafted by the Chicago Bulls. It made it into camp. I think one of the things that fans might find interesting was, obviously you had, a number of years playing with Clyde and seeing that up close, obviously one of the greatest athletes to play the game of basketball. But then you also had the chance to play a bit with Michael Jordan as well.
A bit being the operative word. My NBA career lasted from Tuesday at noon to Wednesday at noon. So it's funny. My brother was always really, really supportive. An older brother was always really, really supportive of me, and so he's driving me to the airport when I'm going to the Bulls camp, and he's like giving me this pep talk. You can make this team. There's not anybody you can't play with. You've dreamed about this. You can make it. And he's going on and on. I'm like, he's going on too much. And I looked at him and I said, and he goes, but just in case, get as many shirts as fast as you can.
Nice.
So I get, I'm there. We had 22 guys in camp, and they had one spot that wasn't guaranteed salary. One spot. Wow. The guy they ended up making it. They even cut Adrian Branch, who was an All-American from Maryland. If y'all remember, a big 7'2" white guy named Mike Smrek. And he ended up playing for the Lakers for a bunch of years as the number 13, 14. He's the only guy that made it. But it's funny. So I called my brother on Wednesday, and he's like, "What?" I go, "Yeah, I need you to pick me up at the airport." He's like, "Dude," I said, "You already cut?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, I'm so sorry." And he's dragging on. Then he goes, "Did you get some shirts?" Yeah, I got some shirts. So then I went. It's interesting because in the middle of that, so that was like literally Tuesday to Wednesday. Tuesday night, there were a couple of people in the crowd. You don't know who everybody is in an NBA organization, but there was a man who came to my hotel room, and he was head coach of a basketball team that was part of Campus Crusade for Christ, a team called Athletes in Action.
Yep, remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the head coach and general manager of the team. And he was going around to NBA camps and looking for guys, for his team. And so this is before I'm cut, right? And so he gives me his card, and he's like, when you get home tomorrow night, call me.
Ouch.
I'm thinking, when you get home, I'm not getting home. I'm here to stay. So anyway, I ended up calling him and had an incredible, experience with them for about 5 or 6 years, and then did one playoff season with the CBA, and then that was enough.
Wow. Yeah.
And that was with Bill Musselman.
Yeah, Bill Musselman was just, boy. I mean, you want to? We'd have to schedule another interview for the Bill Musselman stories. But it was unbelievable. So I went from playing from Coach Lewis, whose entire philosophy was simplify the game. We had one offensive set we ran against man-to-man, and we had two that we ran against the zone, and that was it. That was it. And so you knew all the options, you knew everything, but that was it. Within 48 hours with Musselman, I had a playbook of 66 different plays.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the exact opposite, right? It was like, how complicated can we make the game?
Yeah.
It ended up playing with Michael Ray Richardson and well, I'll tell you who else I played with. Our point guard was Sidney Lowe from NC State.
No.
So let's back up a second. So in the championship game, I'm guarding Sidney, and the scouting report was Sid can't shoot. Sid may make 2 or 3 baskets, but he's not going to beat you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of roaming. I'm trying to take away driving gaps from Derek Wittenberg and doubling down on Cozell McQueen, and I'm just roaming. Sid jumps up and hits a shot. No big deal. He jumps up and hits another shot. No big deal. After he'd hit about his 4th one, I'm looking over at the bench like, they're like, no. And then I think after he hit, his 5th one, they were like, go get him. So everyone remembers, Wittenberg's air ball and the dunk. Yeah. But the guy that killed us in that game was Sidney Lowe because he came out of nowhere. He ended up playing the NBA and coached, but he wasn't an NBA caliber player. So anyway, Sid and I, we did not say one word about the game. Not one word. So we're together for 2 months, going through the playoffs, and we're in Sioux Falls, and we're sitting there, and it's a series, and we just won a game, and CBA, you're taking 1 a.m. flights, if you're lucky, if you're on a flight, not in a van. So he and I are sitting in an airport. Okay, we had not said one word, not a joke, not one word about it. Sitting in an airport having a burger, just him and I. It's 1 a.m., waiting on a plane to get serviced or whatever. ESPN, pops up, big, huge screen TV, and they show the play. Oh. And they show Valvano running around the court. All I'm thinking is, don't look at him. Don't look at him. Finally, I look over at him, and he'd reached into his bag and pulled out his national championship ring, and he was saying, I said, man,
oh my gosh.
What are the chances?
Yeah.
It's Sioux Falls Airport at 1 a.m. sitting there with Sidney Lowe watching the replay.
That is crazy.
So, Reed, how was the locker room after that ending?
Yeah, everyone responded differently. Some people were, I don't know. Yeah, everyone responded differently, and I never wanted to judge anybody for how they reacted. I needed to get away from everybody, and so I was sitting outside the locker room on a stairwell by myself. And so, all the flopping on the court and wailing and all that is, I didn't think was indicative of who we are or who we should be or how we should represent ourselves. But, everybody, responded their own way. It wasn't like we had a big powwow, and I don't even remember Coach talking to us. I think we.
Well, I remember how I reacted.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was Sidney Lowe that killed you guys. I thought it was Terry Gannon with that bear hug on Drexler to get his 4th foul. That was one of the worst calls I've ever seen.
Yeah, and Terry agrees with that. He laughs about it. He laughs about it on the air. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah. But it's interesting looking back, and it's funny when they did the 30 for 30, not the one on us, but the one on them. It was interesting that the producer called our house. And I was at work, and he's talking to my wife, and said, trying to get in touch with Reed. Can I get his number? And she does a good job of saying, tell me again who you are and what this is about. He said, well, we're doing a documentary on NC State, and she's like, yeah, I don't think he's going to be interested. And the guy was like, no, and he's really trying to sell it, and. He said, have you ever seen any of the 30 for 30? She goes, yeah, I'm just telling you, he's not going to be interested in that. So he keeps going. He goes, look, he said, I'm an executive producer. The one I just put together, was on the air last week, the one about Marcus Dupree. Well, my wife is from Philadelphia, Mississippi, and grew up with Marcus Dupree. And so we watched that entire the Marcus Dupree one was like my wife's entire life. Friends and high school coaches and principal. I mean, everyone it was like her life story. And so it's funny. So the producer has no idea, and he goes, "Yeah, I just did the one on Marcus Dupree." And she said, "I grew up with Marcus Dupree." And and the guy goes, "Well, did you like it?" And she said, "Reid will call you in an hour." So it's funny. So the film crew's in my house, and they, as y'all can appreciate, the interview goes on for 3 or 4 hours, and 90% of what you say ends up on the cutting room floor.
Right.
But it was fascinating listening to the whole thing was being told from their perspective, right? Sure. And all the inaccuracies and all the urban myths and all the, it was crazy. And not surprisingly, as I pointed out, all that wasn't true. Didn't end up in the final cut.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe it. Hey, just to give you an idea, I'm sure you were wondering about how demented my life is. I could tell you that I watched Mike Smrek play at Marist.
Oh my gosh, man!
Yeah, how bad is that?
You're like a walking encyclopedia. Hey, I'll tell you a funny story about that game. So about I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe not that long, maybe 5 years ago. I'm a litigation attorney, and I'm trying a case for ExxonMobil, and we're down in the valley. And I can't remember what the case was. I think it was a harassment or discrimination case. Anyway, we're trying this case, and we got a judge, and he's hard-nosed, stickler. Man, he's not cutting anybody any slack, and he's really running a tight show. And so we went through about 3 days of pretrial hearings. It was about a week-long trial, and on day 5, right before lunch, out of the clear blue, he said, "I'm going to dismiss the jury early. Attorney, stay. I need to talk to you." The jury gets up and they leave, and I'm putting on our case, and the judge looks at me and he goes, "Mr. Gettys," he said, I need to ask you, why stall?" And I said, I said, "Judge, I'm putting witnesses on as fast as I can. I've cut 3 witnesses. I've cut my exhibits from 120 exhibits down to 70. I am not stalling." And he goes, "No." Why stall? Like we've been talking about, right? Yeah. In the middle of the trial. And finally I looked up on him, and I knew he went to University of Texas. And it dawned on me, and I said, "NC State?" And he goes, "Yeah." I look over at opposing counsel. Opposing counsel's like, "What are y'all talking about?" Is that crazy? I mean, it's
funny.
It's unbelievable how that game's remembered.
Yeah. Mm. Hey, so Reid, maybe go into a less fun topic. I mean, you've been involved with the University of Houston basketball program. You were there in its heyday. You were actually an assistant coach there, with both, Foster and Drexler. And then we went through this long period of time where really the basketball program was completely off the map.
Yep.
From your perspective, being so close to the program and maybe having a bit more insight, or quite a bit more insight than the average fan, what happened to get to basically 2 decades of being in the desert, from where you would argue when you were there, we were one of the best programs around, right? Certainly in the Southwest, we were the best basketball program when we were all there. So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I've given it a lot of thought. And the reality is, it's a really tough job, because you got to win. You got to do it with Houston kids. Not all Houston kids, but you got to do it with Houston kids, and you have to have the personality that the city, but more specifically the fan base embraces. And so if you think about all the coaches we had after that, Pat Foster didn't win and didn't have a personality and didn't do Houston kids, and that was a miserable failure. The short answer to your question is when they didn't give the job to Donnie Swerock, Coach Lewis's longtime assistant, the program was doomed to bottom out. And then the question was, who can make it bounce back? Penders won a lot of games, but he wasn't embraced. His personality wasn't embraced, and he didn't do it with Houston kids.
Yeah.
The person who did the best job was James Dickey. James Dickey came in, and he's so stoic and so, but he's the one guy who wasn't just building team after team after team. He was building a program. And you remember when Kelvin came in, he lost Daniel House, who went and was all conference in the SEC. He lost Tayshaun Thomas, who was all conference in the Big 12. He lost Joseph Young, who was MVP of the Pac-12. I mean, that's unbelievable. And so it bottomed out again. And the Clyde experiment was the biggest disaster in the history of Division I coaching. And then it was followed up by Ray McCallum.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when Clyde said he wasn't, whatever, when Clyde pulled the plug on it, I remember the athletic director was talking to me about taking the job. And at one point, and I can't remember who else was in the room, he goes, well, why do you want to do this? And I looked at him and I said, I really don't. I said, the problem is we're all going to look stupid if we go into this like we didn't have a backup plan, a transition plan. And if you think you're going to hire, Ray McCallum to come in from Ball State, to be successful, I'm just telling you, it's not going to be. Nice guy, but just not going to be. And so I remember when, it wasn't Mac Rhodes. Who hired Kelvin? It was.
I thought it was Mac Rhodes.
Was it Mac?
Yeah.
So
and then he left shortly after. Yeah.
So I've known Kelvin for 35 years. I've watched him closely when he got to OU and what he did at OU. And Mac called me when he was thinking about it. I say think about it. He may have already decided and he was just trying to line up support. But he called me and he goes, I want to pick your brain about this, about something. I'm like, what? He goes, I want to hire Kelvin Sampson. And I said, you're never going to get him. I said, once he went to the NBA and the success he was having and the reputation he built and established, and the credit that Kevin McHale gave him, and I said, he's never coming back. He said, I think we can get him. I said, I don't think you can. And he goes, let me ask a question. Would you have a problem with it? I was like, are you out of your ever-loving mind? You ought to, if you have a shot, you ought to go put a tent up at the end of his driveway.
Yeah,
you ought to be standing there with coffee when he comes out in the morning. You be there with a cheeseburger when he comes home.
Yeah.
Not only do I not have a problem, I said, the NCAA stuff is funny now when you look at the NIL and all that's going on. When you look at what it actually was and impermissible contacts and phone calls and whether text messages turn, just stupidity. But I didn't dream that he'd come take the job. I didn't dream he'd take it. And I told the story a bunch. His first year, we're broadcasting the game, and I'm sitting there. My son's, talent stats guy, sitting there next to us. And in the middle of the game, I counted the crowd. In the middle of the game, I just started going, 56 people at a game.
Yep.
And transpose that picture to what we've experienced the last 5 years, and
it's crazy.
Other than what Scott Drew did at Baylor, it's hard to come up with enough adjectives to describe what Kelvin has done.
And from your perspective, right? Because you've had a closer view than us. How has he done it from the apathy and the facilities as decrepit as they were at that point to slowly build it brick by brick to get to this point where basically we're back to a top 10 program.
So there's several touch points. I remember Rick Barnes used to talk about the importance of TJ Ford to what he built at Texas. He said, I needed that one player that could become our identity. And Galen Robinson was that guy for Kelvin. Yeah. When he got Galen and his personality, the talent, set the talent aside, but his personality and his infectious impact on people and his ability to be your best recruiter. That was the first touch point. The second touch point, and really is what led to the sustained success, is what he did with Quentin Grimes. That Quentin is floundering. And look, I don't care what they say publicly. He was run out of Kansas. So he was going to declare hardship. He was going to go test the waters. But they gave away a scholarship. He didn't have one to come back to.
Right.
And what Kelvin and Kellen and Quantis and Hollis did with that kid, holy cow. Suddenly you're looking at, what that turns into. Let's go back to the things I said. You got to win. Well, he's going to win. He's got a personality that's gruff and mean and cantankerous, but you adopt it and you like it, and you like how brutally honest he is. He's done it basically with Houston kids, not totally, basically Houston kids, and a style of play that embraces, what our university is and what our city is. So you put all that together, and it is. Literally, I can't. I've run out of adjectives. The fact that we're in the exact same breath consistently with Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina, Kansas. That you're no longer surprised. It is one of the most phenomenal things I've ever seen.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Which of his teams would be your favorite team, or which team do you think has been the best team so far?
That's hard for me. And they all start running together. They've been so snake bit at the end of seasons, with injuries and people hurt. I sat next to Kelvin and Karen when he got that alumni award about a month ago, and he and I were talking, and I said, let me just share something with you. In all of my years around University of Houston basketball, I have never in my life been more proud of a basketball team than the 6 kids you had playing in that game against Duke. I mean, you looked out there and no JoJo and no Terrence and Jamal Shed goes down, and you look out there and Ced Lott's playing and Emmanuel Sharp's playing his absolute heart out, and and you just go down the line, and we're in that game with I don't remember the specifics, but maybe even one possession. And when Jamal went down, I kept looking at my wife. I go, look who's on the floor. And I'm not trying to bash or throw shade at those guys, but that's not a lineup you projected playing Duke to go, to continue. And the heart that those kids played with, it was almost emotional. I told Kelvin, I said, forget anything else, forget Final Fours, forget all that. I said, I've never in my life seen our school and been more proud than I was that night.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. Yeah.
We're the only team in the country that could have won that game against A&M, especially when we went to overtime. We're the only team that could have done that.
Yeah. And the same thing. My son's texting me, he goes, Dad, look who's on the floor.
Yeah.
Look who's on the floor. But Malik steps up and Ced steps up, and you just go down the line. Damian's guarding centers, and power forwards, and it was just. You throw the word around culture a lot. And, you hear Coach talk about it. And if you want to know what it looks like, that's what it looks like. And there aren't 3 coaches on the planet who can produce that kind of effort.
And we had Ryan come off the bench, to hit that key free throw. That exactly. I think it went from a 3-point game to a 4-point game, so we're guaranteed, not to go to overtime again. That was unbelievable. It's kind of like the Rudy story. Rudy got in for one play. Yeah. The Notre Dame kid they made a movie about, and I kind of thought Ryan was like our Rudy.
Well, I don't tell Ryan I said this because I've been a huge Ryan fan. Every time Chick's in the game, first thing I say is, "Hey, look, the fans are chanting like this kid can't play." I'm just telling you, he can play. He can really play. He can really shoot, and he's going to come in locked and loaded, and he's going to hit a couple of shots before he sits down. But he went to the free throw line, and I'm thinking, I'm pacing. I'm pacing in front of our TV. And my wife's like, sit down. He's going to make one. But you don't understand. He hadn't played. He's been sitting over on the bench. He's cold. He hadn't played. He hadn't warmed up. He hadn't touched the ball. She goes, sit down. He's going to make one.
Nice. Where do you see this team?
Yeah.
The future of the 24-25 team, especially, now that Shed's gone and obviously, Uzan's coming in. What do you think about him, and what are your thoughts on the upcoming season?
Yeah, so I don't know the kid. I saw him play once or twice. What I'll tell you is, before he announced he was transferring, that same event, I was sitting next to Kelvin. Somebody came by and said, we're going to be okay without Jamal. And he was like, oh, yeah, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. The guy left. He looked over at me and he goes, trust me, we're going to be fine. The kid was on campus at the time. Lauren's there too, and she's texting people and where are they, what? And so they knew he was about to commit. Look, I'm not a big fan of hype and talking about things. All I know is I have heard more than one person associated with the program saying more talent than they've ever had.
Yeah.
And so, process that one.
Yeah.
You put a hair. No, nobody was playing better basketball than Terrence Arsenault when he went down. Yeah. He was our best rebounder, and what he was doing from the wing was just off the charts. And then, golly, talking about baby giraffe JoJo Tugler. He did things that literally that were Drexler-esque.
Yeah.
His ability to rotate, contest, cover, take out a lane, go back down. It's like, you'd almost diagram him. If I'm doing a telestrator, it looks like this. Just unbelievable. And so I hear great things about the Miller kid, that he is just a walking bucket getter. Like a lot like Caleb Mills, where some kids are just blessed with the ability to put the ball in the basket. And so if he can take the tough coaching, everyone says they can until you get to your first practice, then you find out. But hopefully, Emmanuel and LJ and those guys can wrap their arm around him. Can take the role that Jamal did. With kids as they come in.
Do you know much about McCarty?
Nothing. No.
Okay.
So I'm drawing a blank. I'm optimistic about. Look, I didn't dream Sedlot would ever contribute, and he can contribute. And the other kid that redshirted, they're really, really high on that. He's he's Javier Francis skill set, maybe plus some.
McFarland.
Yeah.
McFarland, yeah. And then the kid from Fort Worth, he didn't leave, did he? The
Cornelius?
Yeah, he's still with the program. Absolutely.
He's a prototypical Kelvin Sampson kid. Tough, strong, chip on his shoulder, plays with an edge. They're just loaded. They're absolutely loaded next year.
Yeah, it's going to be challenging, actually, even finding minutes for kids. I think going
it's
into
a
next
problem
season.
to have in this day and age of NIL and transfers and all that. But it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we have injuries, especially.
Well, we went into this year saying we're going to limit Jamal's minutes because we don't want him tired at the end of the year, and at the end of the year he's playing 48 minutes a game. So I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know we want to be really sensitive with your time, and you've been extremely generous with your time with us today, and we're extremely appreciative of that. Any kind of last thoughts from you that you want to impart with fans going into next season?
We've learned the importance of living in the moment, right? Don't take this for granted. This is not. This is unique, and this is I've told everybody. Everyone wants to glamorize Elvin and his teams and our teams. And make no mistake about it, this is the golden era of Houston basketball. This is it.
Yeah.
And what he's done year after year after year with the program and where it is, man, don't take that for granted. Buy tickets and go to games and support these kids. And, and if you ever get a chance to get to know them, man, it just adds to it. If you get a chance to have a conversation and then suddenly you go, man, he doesn't recruit punks. He doesn't tolerate that. That these are high character kids, and they want to represent and they want to get better. And it's really everything that's good and right about college athletics. Man, we got it sitting right there in the Fertitta Center, and we need to enjoy it.
Yeah, completely agree. I guess the nice part of the program is, for the first time, there are no tickets to be had at this point. Everyone is taken, which is fantastic. Well,
somehow we've got to get to the part where if you're not using them, go to a portal, put them somewhere, and let people grab them and go to games, because it's such a treat at the Fertitta Center. And there's just I've been to a handful of games just as a fan. And it just doesn't matter where you buy a ticket. It doesn't matter where you sit. It really doesn't matter.
That's right.
So
no, it's fantastic. I mean, I didn't mention to you before, I'm based out on the West Coast. I've got season tickets. Bill's the one that uses most of them for me. And then I probably come in for 5 or 6 games a season, and there's nothing better than going to the game live. So.
Yep. All right, guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Reid. We really appreciate it. And hopefully fans will really enjoy this and really enjoy the insights that you provided today. And hopefully we can invite you back at some point in time and chat some more if you're willing.
Do it again. We'll pick up with Bill Musselman and Michael Ray Richardson.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about Michael Ray Richardson.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Right. Thank you so much. Go Cougs.
Take care.
Yep. Thanks, Reid.
Thanks, Reid.
Okay. We'll do it again.
So that's it for this episode number 26 of the No Conference for Old Men podcast. Hope you all enjoyed it. And again, would really appreciate it if folks would follow, subscribe, or collect our podcast, depending on your podcast platform of choice. We're also available via the Republic of Football podcast feed from the folks at Dave Campbell's Texas Football as the only basketball-centric podcast, or at the GoCoogs.com website for those that prefer to digest the content that way. We appreciate the continued support from all, and please give us a follow on our Twitter account, No Conference for Old Men. And as shared before, during the off-season, we're into our monthly cadence, so please be on the lookout to download and listen as our next episode drops in June. Take care, everyone.